In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the structure of blood vessels, and there are three basic types of blood vessels of the vasculature, or of the circulatory portion of the cardiovascular system. The first one are arteries, and that's what illustrated here on the right hand side, these red colored vessels, and these are vessels that transport blood away from the heart. And when these vessels start to migrate towards limbs and tissues, these vessels will start to branch into more numerous smaller arteries. And the sequence of branching defines different terms for these arteries as they become smaller. And so we move from arteries to arterioles. Arterioles will branch into smaller diameter metarterioles, which then branch into the smallest vessels we have, and those are capillaries. Now, arteries are defined not just by transporting blood away from the heart, but almost all arteries transport oxygenated blood. And so this is blood that has been loaded up with oxygen in the lungs and is delivered to the heart itself and to the rest of the body, except the pulmonary arteries. So the pulmonary arteries are the only arteries that do not transport oxygenated blood. Veins, on the opposite end, transport blood towards the heart, and as opposed to arteries that start and branch into smaller vessels, veins start as small vessels and merge into larger vessels and less numerous. And the pattern picks up from what we had in the third bullet item at the top here with capillaries, in that capillaries will merge into a smaller number of very small veins called venules, which then merge into larger veins, which then eventually merge into the vena cava, the superior and the inferior vena cava. And veins are known to carry deoxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins are transporting blood towards the heart, and these are veins coming from the lungs, and that is blood that has picked up molecular oxygen. At the smallest level, smallest diameter level, are capillaries, and these are the smallest blood vessels at the tissue level, and that's what's illustrated here at the very bottom of the right hand corner of the slide. Here we see red blood transporting, oxygenated blood being transported towards tissues, and then at the smallest diameter level are these capillaries, where the blood exchanges molecules with those tissues. And in this illustration, what we're looking at here is that capillary network. And so we start at the very top where we have an arteriole, and the arrows indicate the flow of blood. So the arteriole is the larger of all these blood vessels here, and the arteriole will branch into a metarteriole, and then the metarteriole will then branch further into what's called a thoroughfare channel that will eventually become the smallest vessels we have, and those are the arterial capillaries. What you see here on this diagram are what are called precapillary sphincters. These are rings of smooth muscle that, when contracted, will regulate the flow of blood through these vessels. And then notice the color change as oxygen leaves the blood and diffuses into the tissue through which these blood vessels are coursing, and then carbon dioxide moves from the tissues as well as other metabolic end products into the blood, and that blood has a darker red appearance, but in the textbooks we use the blue color to indicate that blood is deoxygenated. And so then that blood will move through what are called venous capillaries, which then merge into a larger venule. So this entire network of vessels is just simply referred to as the vascular bed, and that refers to these very small blood vessels embedded in tissues as the site of molecule exchange. Many molecules, but namely molecular oxygen, carbon dioxide, as well as nutrients. And what is only pictured here in terms of the precapillary sphincters is that these vessels on the arterial side do contain smooth muscle, particularly arterioles and metarterioles, and we'll see that structure here on the next slide. So here in this illustration, on the left-hand side, we have an artery. On the right-hand side, we have a vein. And we see that these two different types of blood vessels do carry some unique structural characteristics. At the most inner layer is what we call the tunica intima, made up of an endothelium, subendothelial layer, as well as an internal elastic membrane. Here on the arterial side. The endothelium is a layer of endothelial cells that lines the entire cardiovascular system through the ventricles. And so this makes up the innermost layer of the heart, the innermost cells, and that is continuous all the way through the blood vessels. The major point to note here is the tunica media, where we see the smooth muscle as well as other elastic types of fibers, but I want to point your attention to the relative thickness of the smooth muscle on the arterial side and the very, very thin layer of smooth muscle on the venous side. The thick layer of the smooth muscle on the arterial side gives this part of the vasculature greater control of blood flow. So as this muscle is triggered to contract, it would decrease the diameter of the blood vessel and restrict the flow of blood. But we don't see that same level of activity on the venous side. And then the exterior of the of both types of blood vessels is just simply referred to as the tunica externa and contains collagen fibers. And if we go to the bottom here, we're taking a look here at a drawing of a capillary, and a capillary is quite a bit different than the structure of an artery or a vein, where it does not have the same number of layers that we see with these other vessels, but the capillary is made up mainly of these endothelial cells and the outer basement membrane, which helps to give that capillary structure. And so this is an advantage because this type of structure will allow the easy movement of molecules from the blood into tissues and from tissues into the blood. On this last slide, we're just going to illustrate the pulmonary circulation vessels. And when we think about the heart, it's very common to think about the lungs at the same time because there is this interconnection, integrated network between these two major organs. And so what we see here is the right pulmonary artery. Remember, the artery is defined as the vessel leaving the heart, but this is carrying blue blood, so blood that has less oxygen, and we're going to send it to the lungs in order to pick up that oxygen. So the right pulmonary artery will travel to the right lung, the left pulmonary artery will travel to the left lung, and both arteries stem from the pulmonary trunk, which is a continuation of the tissue from the right ventricle. And what's illustrated here are a range of pulmonary veins. So pulmonary veins are named according to the fact that these veins are transporting blood towards the heart, and this blood is oxygenated. On the top right hand corner, what we see here is the mechanism of that oxygenation. So the alveolus, or we have multiple alveoli here. This is the smallest functional unit of the lungs, and when we have a pulmonary capillary, the smallest vessel of the cardiovascular system, in this case this one happens to be in the lungs, this allows the easy diffusion from this part of the lung tissue of oxygen into blood, and since that blood is transporting carbon dioxide that was picked up at the tissue level, that carbon dioxide will diffuse into the alveolus and will be expelled when a person breathes out. So this ends our third video of part 1 of the cardiovascular system.